Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to. Well, folks, government involvement within the American healthcare system has been nothing short of a disaster. The legacy that it leaves behind is not a good one. As I have mentioned on previous solo flight special editions of our state-of-the-art radio program, government involvement with healthcare started with Theodore Roosevelt in the opening decade of the 20th century, and it has only gotten worse since. And you know, folks, that's one of the things that we always have to keep in mind with respect to the way the government's acting and the way that the government has been utilizing the type of control that it has over the facets of our daily lives. It's not that they are interested in the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. Rather, it's about power, manipulation, and all of that is, contained in this package of control. But more than just control, it ultimately leads to unabashed corruption, the very thing that huge swaths of the American electorate are highly disappointed with the functioning of our government in recent years. It's why there has been this huge alienation and this sense of growing outrage within the hearts, souls, and minds of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. And unfortunately, this shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. We here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been warning about a rogue, tyrannical, and ultimately illegitimate federal government since the airing of our premiere episode, which was on September 11th of 2015. And yes, folks, we are fast approaching our 2-year anniversary. But what comes to mind with respect to all of this is that the federal government is essentially entrenching itself in a place and position that our founding fathers never really intended for it to be, dating back to the inception of this nation some 242 odd years ago. So how did we wind up in this position? Well, it's that the government always assumes a position of being the end-all be-all solution to the great myriad and plethora of problems that we face, both as a nation and people. Of course, the problem with this erroneous line of thinking is that it is diametrically opposed to those two fundamental pillars upon which American society was established well over 200 years ago, that of self-accountability and self-responsibility working in tandem, thereby delivering unto us self-determination. You see, the American people are always at their best when they are capable of being self-determinant. And this is something that I'm going to explore in depth further in the program. But basically, we know that Theodore Roosevelt, back in the opening decade of the 20th century, initiated this leviathan of an administrative state, and it's only gotten worse since. Now, the gutless opposition party, or GOP, is getting ready to revive their attempts to foist the debacle known as the so-called American Health Care Act down the throats of the people, despite the fact that we all know about the well-established track record of government-involved healthcare's failings. You see, they don't care. That's the tragedy of it all. Both of the mainstay political parties have essentially become the flip face of the same titular statist coin. They are both doing everything within their power to essentially strip and deprive the American people of their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And that's just not going to improve at any point within the foreseeable future. When we look back to the foundational documents of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic, we see that our founding fathers did not consider healthcare to be a right. And again, it's as our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, has stated on the episodes in which he made an appearance, that the rights that we have that are constitutionally protected will be found in the Bill of Rights or the first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution. If it's not there, then it is not a constitutionally protected right. That is just the way that our system always was. And of course, we want it to be that way. Because when you ask yourself, what is it that is the fountain, and source of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights? Is it the government that gives the rights to us? No. They are fundamental, inalienable, God-given rights. That means that they were endowed to us in our capacity as United States citizens, whether we be natural-born or naturalized, by our Creator, the God of nature himself. And so it makes sense when you apply just simple logic to it. If the government gives you rights, then the government can take those rights away. And that is diametrically opposed to the conclusion that our founding fathers drew at the inception of this nation. And it's just one of those inescapable things. I know that this notion of healthcare not being a right is something that we have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence the Wright Flyer, but it is something that must be repeated again. It's because we see so many on either sides of the political spectrum attempting to claim that healthcare is a right. We see that there is an alarming yet growing number of American citizens who have reached this erroneous conclusion. And what's so tragic about reaching this erroneous conclusion is that they don't even realize that they are acting in a way that is detrimental and is dangerous and is impacting their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Of course, they think that the government is some benevolent body, which of course in and of itself is an erroneous thought and conclusion. Because if you think back to the way that our founding fathers considered the central power and authority of a federal government, they looked upon it as by necessity being one of a necessary evil. It's there to provide some stability, but it must, by its very nature, be something of limited scope, breadth, power, influence, but above all, control. And we seemingly don't know this anymore. We seemingly don't apply any emphasis to this anymore. We seemingly just don't care about the impact that this has on us, both as a nation and a people. And the longer that we allow this to continue unchallenged or unchecked, the greater difficulties we will encounter as we attempt to rekindle American prosperity in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. And again, it's got to be noted that I say all of this because there is that growing sense in this country that healthcare is a right. But the problem with this form of thinking is that it is counterintuitive. It goes against the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. Because it suggests that the government can create rights at the drop of a hat. But when we look at the clear and concise language contained within the Bill of Rights or the first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution, we see that nothing could be further from the truth. The natural law tenets prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that the government is not endowed with the power to create rights. And I can say it so emphatically because the Ninth Amendment states in no uncertain terms that rights can be neither created nor destroyed by the government. Furthermore, if the government is the purveyor of rights, then it means that the government can also take rights away. And that is certainly something that our founding fathers did not believe to be the case. It just isn't what they thought was true, and it's certainly something that, reasonable people would not want to be the case either, because that would mean that the government has the ability to dictate to us how we go about the facets of our daily lives. Again, taking away from those two fundamental pillars that form the basis of American society, that of self-accountability and self-determination, self-responsibility rather, working in tandem, thereby delivering unto us self-determination. But the best way to see this is that founding father George Mason was the one who best understood that our rights are endowed to us by our Creator, the God of nature himself. After all, he was the one who insisted that we include the Bill of Rights or the first 10 amendments to our shared United States Constitution within that incredible document. And he originally reached this conclusion when he was called upon to help draft the Declaration of Rights for the state of Virginia. And he realized that government, by its very nature, has this tendency to stand in staunch opposition to the hopes, dreams, and future aspirations of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. And as I have mentioned on previous episodes of our state-of-the-art radio program, that was revolutionary. This notion that the American people were the fountain or font of sovereignty was new. I'm sure you've all read certain novels or certain things or heard the terms of a king being called a sovereign. That's because under the old monarchical system, the way that they viewed sovereignty was that it was condensed in a singular individual, or in the case of Great Britain, it was condensed within the king and parliament. Now, they would try to say via that notion of virtual representation that this extended to the people, but that's not the case. You know, one of the things that led to that long, drawn-out, bloody affair known as the American War of Independence was this fact that the British Parliament there in London claimed that the colonists were represented via virtual representation. This notion that it's okay because you, in your capacity as a British subject, would be represented. But the colonists had no say over the legislative bodies. And again, it leads into this notion that governments are ill-equipped to address the particularized needs of a particular geopolitical area or a particular people, especially in a large country like that of the United States. When we ignore this, when we go against this, it works against our best interests each and every time. I say that because we are an independent people. Again, going back to those two fundamental pillars of society that form that bedrock foundation of who we are, both as a nation and people. Unfortunately, we have allowed ourselves to be taken so far astray from that which truly matters that we're beginning to lose sight of that. But again, it was also seen in the language that Thomas Jefferson had included in the Declaration of Independence. Namely, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain fundamental and unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You see, again, it goes right back to that spirit, that foundational spirit that led to the ultimate creation of the United States of America, both as a nation and people. However, this whole notion is under attack. It all is. And you see, where confusion arises is with respect to the fundamental and inalienable God-given right to life in this issue of healthcare. The left is doing everything within its power to convince us that the right to life includes an alleged right to healthcare. However, this conclusion is both deceitful and erroneous, because if you look at the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, you will find no such right to health care. You will find no such right listed within the Bill of Rights or first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And again, it is because we are supposed to be a self-determinate people. That means that we must be accountable and responsible for our health care, and therefore that is what allows us to be determinate over healthcare, meaning that we can make the ultimate determinations as to what treatment we can afford and what treatment is necessary, and then move on from there. But here's the thing. This conclusion by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist is a line of thinking that didn't really even start until the emergence of the Leviathan administrative state under Theodore Roosevelt in 1906. I remember during the first time that the so-called American Health Care Act was being foisted down our throats and completely against our will, and when the 45th President of these United States of America, Donald J. Trump, took a staunch stance against the House Freedom Caucus that was actually taking a stance for the American people and was basically holding the gutless opposition party or GOP's feet to the fire to make them basically follow through with this great myriad and multitude of promises that they made over the course of the past approximate 7 years, that I had said the story, or I told you the history of the way that Theodore Roosevelt had started the administrative state and how that has been detrimentally impacting this nation ever since. And again, it's something that shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. Both mainstay political parties are going out of their way to try and keep us under the thumb of a rogue, tyrannical, and dare I say, ultimately illegitimate federal government against the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. It's just how it's been going. But this foundation, or this creation of the so-called almighty administrative state was compounded when his cousin FDR pushed for Social Security and other so-called safety net programs, which culminated with Johnson's Great Society. That's where we got Medicare and Medicaid. All of that was designed to basically, at least by their claims, protect our seniors to ensure that they could receive the best health care. It was just a hand up. It wasn't supposed to be a permanent handout like it's become, and to help the indigent in this nation who could not afford their health care. And then, of course, that was also compounded with the establishment of such, or rather the passing of such laws as EMTALA and COBRA. And again, it just kept marching on. You give them an inch, they will take the entire country. It's not just a mile. Their greed knows no bounds, and they will do anything to try and control the facets of our daily lives. And therefore, it is our duty, obligation, but above all responsibility in our capacity as United States citizens to stand up to these nefarious efforts. It is our duty to preserve our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights because no one else on God's green earth has the power, the authority, or even the wherewithal to do it, and that is by the very inherent design of this, our constitutionally endowed Federalist Representative Republic. But again, we're not learning about that. Again, this is not the way that the discussions have been focused. It's not the way that the topics have been addressed. Instead, it has led us astray. And this is the problem when the government increasingly distances and divorces itself from the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. It leads us to an untenable as well as unsustainable situation. And it shows no signs of improving. And all of this moved the inner workings of the Republic away from what our founding fathers had originally intended. You see, that's the thing. They always go about this in such a form and facet. They always attempt to push us away from that because they think it's antiquated. And I'll get more into that as well. But we see that when a nation begins to traverse the path of government-involved healthcare, it becomes nigh impossible to uproot the cancerous violations of our rights. And that's because people become addicted to it. They begin to think erroneously that the government is the supplier or purveyor of their rights. But the problem with that is that it ignores what our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights are, for one thing, and it also ignores that our rights cannot be given or taken away from us. They are non-negotiable, they are non-delegable, they belong to we the people. And that is part of what it means to be a popular sovereign. We have to be a self-determinate people, and this is why that sagacious founding father Samuel Adams, as I have oftentimes mentioned on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, said that in order for the United States of America to be a strong, robust, and dare I say vibrant republic, the people had to be virtuous. In other words, we have to live by a high standard of morality. And yes, that may sound very repetitive, and it may sound completely abstract on the surface, but when you stop and think about it in an objective form and fashion, you are left with but one inexorable conclusion, and that is, for you to be free, you have to understand a clear and distinct difference between that which is right and that which is wrong, and you have to be able to know how your government was designed to operate. This is why my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have so frequently reiterated that it is absolutely imperative that we all foster a fluent and working knowledge and understanding of not only our shared United States Constitution, but also, and thereby, our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. That is what empowers us in our capacity as United States citizens to put our collective foot down to this leviathan of an administrative state and say enough is enough. You do not have the power, nor the authority, nor the wherewithal to drastically, fundamentally, and irreparably redefine this nation, taking it away from being a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic and transforming it into some godforsaken, frothing-at-the-mouth, Fabian socialist leftist dystopia torn straight from the pages of an Orwellian nightmare. Yet that is what both sides of the political aisle are hell-bent on accomplishing in this, our modern arena of American politics. And that is part of the reason why we're seeing the unleashing of this anger, this discontentment within the body politique of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, and again, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. And that's unfortunate. It truly is. But you know, that's the thing. This is something that the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists have been pushing for over the course of the past 150-plus years. They have been very dedicated to their attempts to undermine the societal framework and fabric of this, our beloved representative republic. And they do so because they fully realize that their position is one of intellectual disingenuousness. They know that they cannot compete in the free marketplace of ideas because their ideas and their philosophy would be considered theft by any other name. And no one who is applying a modicum of sense would want to have the government trample upon their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. You see, there is a sense of laziness, a sense of complacency, for lack of a better term, that has begun to set in the hearts, souls, and minds of a great many Americans. And this problem is only going to be exacerbated. It has only been growing worse with each passing day. And that's frightening. It's something that should alarm decent, hard-working, red-blooded American citizens from coast to coast and border to border in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. But here's the thing. They, being the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, desire the government to be able to control and micromanage the facets of our daily lives, from cradle until grave. This is all they think about. And all of this is violative of the foundational principles that our founding fathers established well over 200 years ago. But you see, this is why they start dabbling in cultural Marxism and in that cancerous notion of identity politics. It is all designed to bamboozle the American people, to make the American people loathe and despise this country. And that is why you always see them as the Blame America First crowd. That is literally the way their dark, twisted machinations and ideologies work. It is that they must tear down that which is the longest standing constitutional republic in the course of human history, because they know that the Constitution prohibits what they're trying to accomplish. And you remember that we have stated on previous episodes that French philosopher and admirer of America during her halcyon days, Alexis de Tocqueville, essentially said that those who push for any type of socialism are nothing short of New Age feudalists, that they are literally attempting to try and create a soft form of despotism, a static caste system in which the elites carve out a special niche for themselves and the rest of us are left the table scraps. That's what it comes down to. If you really want to talk about the duplicitous nature of the arguments, as well as the ideological bent of the left, it's that they proclaim that they are a classless system, yet everywhere that they go into power, you see that the ruling elites rule like nobility. They carve out these special appointments for themselves. They ensure that there are two separate and distinct codes of law, and that the most draconian and overzealous regulations are applied to the body politique as opposed to the ruling elites. It is base and rank hypocrisy. I can think of no more apt a way to describe exactly what it is that they're doing or what it is that they are attempting to foist upon the people. And it is something that our founding fathers would have rejected wholeheartedly. And that's the thing. They attempt to argue that the Constitution is antiquated and cannot keep up with the fast-paced modern society in which we live today. Of course, nothing could be further from the truth. As Jeremy and I have stated before, the Constitution is based upon the natural law tenets which are, by their very own structure, immutable. In other words, they are just as applicable today as they were over 200 years ago at the founding of this nation, just as, God willing, they will be over 200 years from today. However, to maintain this, we must recognize the attempts by the statists to undermine those rights and to indoctrinate the up-and-coming generations into believing that the Constitution is outdated and inadequate. That is how they operate. That is what they want us to conclude. And we see that the way that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, through historical revisionism, through such drivel as the standard core or common core standard of education, have done just that. They have, for decade after successive decade, whittled away at the fundamental and inalienable rights of the people by eliminating our understanding of it. It's basically just like how in George Orwell's 1984, the government attempted to control everything, even the ability of the population to reproduce. You know, it may sound fantastical, but that is not a far-fetched thing to understand when it comes to the government. Think of the way that they pushed perversions such as same-sex marriage. That is all designed to undermine the time-honored values, institutions, and traditions of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours, and again, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. So we have to be cognizant and aware of this danger. But that's the thing. The simple fact of the matter is that the government is ill-equipped to care for the individualized needs of the people. Furthermore, the government becoming this involved within our lives violates the fundamental principles upon which this nation was founded. Self-accountability and self-responsibility necessarily require that we all be responsible for our own health care. That's what it means to be self-determinate. When we mention the rationing of medicine and the notion of a single-payer system, it takes determination as to scope and treatment of, as well as quality of care, away from the individual and places it squarely in the hands of the government. The left attempts to skew the numbers to point to other nations with universal health care systems and claim that it works better than our system. Firstly, those nations usually have smaller populations, and secondly, none of those nations have our constitutional system. Thus, we are not supposed to turn to foreign law. Rather, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, or the Supremacy Clause, our shared United States Constitution is the supreme law of the land. That is the only thing that we are supposed to look to for our law and legislative process. But unfortunately, that's not the way things have been operating as of late. So the push for government involvement with healthcare isn't about providing the maximum number of people with the best care available. Rather, government involvement within our healthcare system is designed to gain more power and control for the government. That's really all there is to it. The government sees it as a way to ensure that they get more money from the people and place yet another line of division between patients and their treating physicians. This is what leads to the inefficient administering of care and also to increased frustrations by the people with respect to the healthcare system. The waiting times in our nation's emergency rooms and hospitals will be quadrupled under a single-payer system, and the government will blame doctors for the increased inefficiency. This is, of course, intellectually disingenuous, but the government will never take it upon itself to admit fault. Rather, they will use it as another opportunity to increase the scope, breadth, power, control, and influence of the federal government overall. And again, that is something we can ill afford to allow to come into fruition, because when you stop and think about it with a modicum of objectivity, you see that the government has no idea how to run healthcare. It has no idea how to run anything. It can't even run the United States Postal Service in an efficient fashion. And of course, it gets rid of our ability to think for ourselves, our ability to care for ourselves, our ability to act for ourselves. But that is one of the most important things that we have. And truly, it is going to take a concerted effort on the part of we the people. Because if we do not take action to stand for what is rightfully ours, no one else is going to do it. The government is certainly not going to come out there and act in our best interest. The government is not going to stand up for us. The government is just there to feed itself. It is a cancer on the body politic of this country, and it is beginning to metastasize. Again, this is why our founding fathers did not want us to turn to the government as an end-all, be-all solution for whatever cornucopia of problems we might encounter both as a nation and people. They expected us to be self-determinate, self-reliant, and thereby responsible. So self-responsibility, self-accountability, and self-determination. The trifecta of Americanism. That's literally what it comes down to, folks. And we have gone so far astray from that I believe this nation would be unrecognizable to our founding fathers other than being that of a tyrannical and despotic cesspit. But here's the thing. When we talk about the government using this as an opportunity to increase its scope and power, it is the undeniable pattern we see with government each and every time that they implement more facets or more tentacles to this leviathan of the administrative state. And again, it is all designed with the cursory purpose and design to bring this nation down to its knees, to take the American people and force them to be slaves to a government. As always, the government blames the private sector for the ills that face the nation and claim that they can solve the problem. And we know that this is intellectually disingenuous. We know that this does not operate within the best interests of the American people. It's because government is ill-equipped to meet the particularized needs of the people. It is just there to protect our ability to exercise our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights without fear of government incursions or government encroachment or abridgment of those rights. And you see, that's literally what it comes down to, folks. That is how we are to operate both as a nation and people. But again, as I mentioned earlier, we have slowly broken away from that. We have slowly allowed ourselves to trudge down a path that we can ill afford to traverse. Why? Because, as my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, and I have so oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, without our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, we are truly left with nothing. Stop and think about that for a moment. Stop and think about the detrimental impact that will have on the facets of your daily lives, that will have on the national heritage, character, spirit, but above all, identity of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. It will have that drastic impact. It will be detrimental. It is. We've already seen that to be the case. But here's the thing. When the government says that it can solve the problems which it initiated in the first place, it's a lie. What they refuse to admit is that more often than not, they created these problems in the first place. They are the ones who create these draconian and overzealous regulations that throttles the life out of the private sector in this country. They are the ones who attempt to place the government above the people when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. And unfortunately, that has been the well-established pattern of this federal government for a very long time. But folks, this is Cloward and Piven in full practice. Remember, Cloward and Piven were those two egghead academicians from Columbia University during the 1950s and 60s who wanted to establish a permanent entitlement state to work in conjunction with the Leviathan and almighty administrative state. Their entire purpose was to overwhelm the system that had already been created by frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist Theodore Roosevelt, his cousin FDR, and now they were pushing for the Great Society and various other permanent welfare states. And the way that they pushed for this to be the new norm was to overwhelm the people, so that the people would come to the government on bended knee, begging the government to solve a problem that government created in the first place. And this is what it is. It's Cloward and Piven in full practice. It's designed to overwhelm the private system. And when the private system fails to cope with all of the increased red tape, the government responds by creating even more red tape until they have full control. As you can see, this creates a vicious circle in which our liberties are slowly chipped away. And that's by design, folks. That is what they were hoping to achieve. And all of this leads to a slow usurpation of our rights in an incremental fashion. As we have oft times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that is the very purpose that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have set themselves to for a century and a half now. And recall that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists trace their origins back to 19th century Great Britain, where they had a society. George Bernard Shaw was their leader. And the entire impetus of it, and their original iconography describes this perfectly, was that of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Oh, they would make it sound so innocuous, what they were attempting to do. They would make it sound as though you would have to be out of your right mind to oppose anything that they wanted to put into place, and therefore anyone who took a stance against whatever it was that they were attempting to foist upon the people had to be insane. They were attempting to infiltrate, and they are infiltrating, the upper echelons of polite society. And in so doing, they begin to lull the people into a false sense of security, and then they bamboozle the people using terms of art and that dark and twisted game of semantics that we have warned you about since our premiere episode of September 11th of 2015. All of these things work in conjunction to undermine and unravel the sovereignty and authority of we the people. It's about the greater good, they claim, but there is no greater good in what it is that they are attempting to orchestrate. There is no benefit that truly comes to the aid of the American people or to the or to the functioning of our government from their dark and maniacal schemes. But again, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are determined to slowly, in incremental fashion, strip and deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. They want us to believe that the government gives it to us. They want us to believe that this government is a benevolent friend. And again, that's almost exactly like an Orwellian nightmare. Remember that the innocuous name that Orwell gave to that tyrannical and despotic government in his magnum opus of 1984 was Big Brother. Big Brother loves you. Except Big Brother didn't love you. Big Brother was there to supply himself. He was there to encourage himself, to take it upon himself to intrude and encroach upon every corner, every facet, the lives of the people. And it was all deceptive. It was all propagandist. It was all designed to brainwash people. And of course, it was a metaphor, for lack of a better term, for the Soviet Union. George Orwell had seen the horrific actions of the communists in the Spanish Civil War. Now, he was a socialist himself, but he became increasingly disenfranchised with it as he saw that it all led down to this path of absolutism on the part of the government. Absolute power, corruption, and control. And again, it was something that he began to see as a true evil, because when you stop and think about it with a modicum of objectivity, there is no other way to describe that. It is evil. It is a true evil. It is an evil and a detriment that has no place in an open, honest, but above all, free society like that of the United States. But here's the thing. They, of course, being the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, assume the haughty position that they know what's best for us, and that we cannot begin to fathom what is in our best interest. This is that elitist mentality that we're now starting to see espoused by both mainstay political parties. They are both pushing for a goal that is diametrically opposed to who we are, both as a nation and people, and again, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. We are facing this dark, turgid, and turbulent time with no relief in sight. But there is relief. There is a key to unlock the chains and shackles of governmental bondage, servitude, tyranny, but above all oppression, and that key has been with us since the birth of this nation well over 200 years ago. As we have so oft times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that key is none other than our shared United States Constitution. And that is why the constitutional compositionist movement must be one that is dedicated to restoring strict adherence to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution at all levels of government. Because when we do that, then we begin to reclaim our freedom. We begin to become the robust, vibrant, and virtuous republic that our founding fathers always intended for us to be. But here's the thing. They think they know what's in our best interest, but nothing could be further from the truth. But it is what they do. It's as the great visionary Zygmunt Dobbs warned about in his magnum opus of Keynes at Harvard, all the way back in the 50s and 60s, that the Fabians will stop at nothing to make us think they are working in our best interests. Yet the truth of the matter is that they are only worsening and exacerbating the current state of affairs in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. There's really no other way around this self-evident truth, folks. We see it in the way that government manipulates things and creates corruption. Recall that Barack Hussein Obama, when he was pushing the so-called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, said that if you liked your health care plan, you could keep it, period. That if you liked your physician, you could keep your physician, period. But when it really came down to how that worked in a matter-of-fact fashion, how it worked in practice, that's not what it was. That thing, as we learned from its architect, Jonathan Gruber, that bill, was designed in such a way as it had to be sold on a pack of lies. And they were banking on what they called the stupidity of the American electorate, except that a vast majority of the American electorate was opposed to the so-called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act since its inception. And then the gutless opposition party, or GOP, had assumed the position of being in staunch diametric opposition to this government takeover of our private health care field. Over the course of the past 7 approximate years, they have been saying full repeal, full overturning, full dismantling of it. But then it became repeal and replace. Now it is repair and amend. And they are trying to bring forth a second effort to essentially revive that debacle and fiasco known as the so-called American Health Care Act, which is just Obamacare Light, Obamacare version 2.0. But it's just as buggy and crappy as the first one. And again, folks, all of this goes against our best interest. All of it weakens us. All of it places us in this untenable and unsustainable situation. So how do we overcome it? Again, as we have so oft-times stated on this, our state-of-the-art radio program, the way we do it is we go back to the key that has been with us since our nation's conception. It means going back to strict adherence to the clear and concise language within the Constitution at all levels of government, meaning from the local and municipal level to the county level, to the state level, and ultimately to the federal government. And when we look at the natural order of things, or the natural law tenets, we see that the further the government divorces itself from the people or gets away from the people, the less power by necessity that it should have. That is the way that our founding fathers had developed this federalist representative republic to work and operate. But we see that in this current day and age, that is not how they are going about it. That is not what they are doing. That is not what they have in mind. It is about further fueling and feeding this monstrosity and leviathan of an almighty administrative state that works to the great detriment of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, each and every time. And so therefore, now more than ever, it is imperative that we in our capacity as United States citizens stand shoulder to shoulder in solidarity and unity and put our collective foot down and say enough is enough, that we're not going to give in to these charlatans. The father of our Constitution, James Madison, stated it best when he said that our rights would not be destroyed in a single violent usurpation or action. Rather, they would be eroded gradually, over time, through incremental usurpation. And again, as I had just mentioned earlier, and as I have mentioned on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, that's exactly what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists are attempting to do. That is exactly what their modus operandi is. Remember, they are a wolf in sheep's clothing. They base their name off of the Roman general Fabius, who defeated the Carthaginian general Hannibal, who had wreaked havoc in Rome. Now, how did he do it? Well, he knew that his legions really couldn't take the Carthaginian general head on. So he used a series of distracting flanking maneuvers to move the established military might and power of the Carthaginians away from friendly territory, drawing them deeper into enemy territory and thereby stretching their supply lines. It's the same thing that the Germans attempted to do in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. They realized that the Allied supply lines, but particularly the American supply lines, were stretched far too thin in the area around, again, the Ardennes forest. And so they saw a bulge in the line, an area where they could cut through and then do a pincer maneuver and destroy us. Of course, it failed because they had to rely on the cloud cover, or the cover of fog, the inclement weather that was in the region at that time, but it cleared up and American air support returned, and they became sitting ducks for our air superiority. Well, in this case, our air superiority is, without a question, the Constitution and our rights, and being free from a rogue, tyrannical, and ultimately illegitimate federal government intruding upon the facets of our daily lives. Again, self-accountability and self-responsibility working in tandem, thereby to give us self-determination. And you see, that was the near infinite wisdom and foresight, as well as sagacity of our founding fathers, that they realized that it would be these dark, twisted, and dare I say nefarious forces working in incremental fashion to trudge upon, to abridge, to usurp, and to strip and deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And again, the only way that we can overcome this is for us to be proactive in the maintenance and safeguarding of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, because no one else can do that. And it's certainly not the responsibility of the government, because the government is the villain, basically. And you know, this usurpation, it's a sad state of affairs that we are currently facing in this beloved republic of ours. The government is attempting to erode upon our ability to be determinate in our capacity as United States citizens. They want to make any and all determinations of life and death for us, but they do not have the power, nor do they have the authority, nor the wherewithal to do that. It was not endowed to them. It is not enumerated unto them by the clear and concise language within the four corners of the Constitution, yet they have taken it upon themselves to further distance and divorce themselves from the Constitution. And thereby, they are operating in a form and facet that works against the best interests of we the people. And unless and until we, in our capacity as United States citizens, are ready, willing, and able to stand up to this, it is going to continue unabated. That's just the way it is. That's just the hard state of reality that we face both as a nation and people, and it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. Because both of the mainstay political parties are operating in such a form and facet as to further distance and divorce themselves from the Constitution, and thereby to dishonor the American people. I certainly wish that wasn't the case, but facts are facts. Reality is reality. We have to go by the facts on the ground, because if we don't, then we allow ourselves to be deluded by these dark, twisted, and maniacal forces that are hell-bent on the complete and utter annihilation of the United States, both as a nation and people. As you know, the Founding Fathers never intended for our government to be so omnipresent. In fact, they viewed the government as nothing short and nothing more than a necessary evil. In other words, we are not supposed to simply hand government power because it makes us feel secure. Benjamin Franklin warned that those who give up essential liberties to purchase a little temporary security deserve neither liberty nor security. Well, that's what people who have been misled to conclude that health care is a right are doing. They are sacrificing essential liberty and thereby the ability to be self-determinant for temporary security. They don't want to have to assume upon themselves the great responsibility of providing care unto themselves and their family. But when we recall what the preamble to our shared United States Constitution says, it is our responsibility and obligation to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. That means not just for ourselves, but for the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations which have yet to be born. We owe it to the up-and-coming generations, as well as those unborn generations, to safeguard their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. That is our duty and our obligation in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereigns, and thereby United States citizens. It really comes down to that. The fact of the matter is, folks, we don't want the government to tell us how to live our lives. And we shouldn't want the government to tell our physicians what steps they can or cannot take to ensure our health and well-being. It goes to simple logic that we must provide for our own healthcare needs. No one person is the same when it comes to their healthcare needs. However, government always operates under a set standard. They will determine, based on a series of statistics and averages, what type of treatment a physician may render to his or her patients. All the while, they'll continue to increase in exponential fashion the draconian and overzealous regulations that have been crippling the healthcare field for generation after successive generation. None of this, and I truly mean none of this, works in the best interest of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. And that is by its very design. That is exactly what they are trying to do. It is that they want to control what goes on in our lives, because that way they can continue the gravy train. That way they can continue to secure certain special, insular, and discrete rights unto themselves at the great expense of the popular sovereigns. This is why government is nothing short of a parasite. It is by its nature parasitic. It works to essentially give the government more power and control. And through that, they gain more influence. And through that, they are able to give themselves largesse that they were never intended to have. That is the unfortunate state of affairs that we face in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, and it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. Now, I'm not saying this as a form of depressing the people, and I'm not attempting to engage in fear-mongering here. Rather, I'm trying to point out the path of what the problem is and how we get back to the solution, which is, of course, strict adherence to the Constitution at all levels of government. It is going to require that all of us be proactive. It is going to require that we make our voices heard, that we make our disgruntled position known to those charlatans who are hiding in their marble-clad offices in the nation's capital at Washington, D.C. Because when you stop and think about it with a modicum of objectivity, they are viewing us as the great unwashed Huns. But you know what, folks? All of this government-mandated regulation over our healthcare system has been leading to the destruction of private practice in medicine. And of course, that is the inevitable result any time that the federal government begins intruding upon the private sector. It was for this reason that our founding fathers had an inherent distrust of centralized power and authority. Essentially, what the government does, by its very nature, is to staunchly oppose the independence of the people. Again, it's because they view the people as just a cog in the machine, something to be abused, something to be utilized to secure their own largesse, while the rest of us live in abject fear of how are we going to maintain the quality and standard of life that we have grown accustomed to? You see, that's the dark, twisted, and nefarious nature of what we are facing with this leviathan of an administrative state. It is something that works against our best interests each and every time, and the government simply doesn't give a damn about the detrimental and deleterious consequences that are wrought by their attempts to further distance and divorce themselves from the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. Again, that has been the steady tirade that they've been on. It has been what they have been attempting to foist down our throats time and time again, and they won't stop. The government is not going to ever really attempt to curtail itself unless there are principled people in the upper echelons thereof. And again, this goes directly back to what that sagacious founding father, Sam Adams, suggested that we needed to do, told us that we needed to do, in order to remain a vibrant, robust, but above all, free republic, and that is to be a virtuous people. That is to live by a high standard of morality, having a code of morality, being able to differentiate and distinguish between that which is clearly right and that which is clearly wrong. But the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism, what we have declared war upon here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have been utilized by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists to bludgeon those of us who still adhere to our time-honored values, morals, institutions, and traditions. That's why they attack the institution of marriage. That is why they attack this notion of self-accountability and self-responsibility working in tandem, thereby delivering unto us self-determination. They loathe and despise these notions. They realize that these notions will stand in diametric opposition to their dark and twisted goals and machinations. And again, that is something we simply cannot ignore. We can ill afford to ignore it because it works against our best interests each and every time. But it does require that we foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of not only our shared United States Constitution, but also our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. That we proactively maintain and safeguard said rights. Now, I fully realize that this is far easier said than done, but done it must be, and it is our ultimate responsibility in our capacity as United States citizens to do it. We can't expect this to be done by anybody else. We can't delegate it to anybody else. We damn sure cannot expect some messianic figure to come down from providence above and sweep up the mess that has been created by generation after successive generation of failed government and public policy. Why would we submit ourselves to that when it is clearly erroneous, clearly wrong? Has no basis or foundation in reality whatsoever. It makes absolutely no sense. But that's what they do. And unfortunately, this power, everything the government does, by its very nature in this modern system of American polity is to staunchly oppose the independence of the people. This is directly contrary to the foundational image that our founding fathers conjured up at the time of the drafting and ultimate ratification of our shared United States Constitution. Every time that the government seeks to further distance and divorce itself from the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution, the problems facing the nation and people are exacerbated. Again, this is a self-evident truth that we are going to have to grapple with both as a nation and people, because it is not something that we can easily resolve or easily come to terms with. We know that our founding fathers inherently and innately distrusted centralized governmental power and authority. We can see it through the early evolutionary process of the central government. Within the first governing document of the fledgling United States, the Articles of Confederation, the central government lacked any authority to act on its own. Why? Again, it came down to this notion that the United States must be one or a republic that operates with those fundamental pillars of self-accountability and self-responsibility working in tandem to give the American people, who are the ultimate wielders of sovereignty, self-determination. That's what it was about. But unfortunately, the Articles of Confederation proved to be wholly inadequate when it came to meeting the needs of safeguarding the ability of the popular sovereigns to freely exercise their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. And that's what led them to this great debate. Because that system proved inadequate for the best interests of the American people, the Founding Fathers engaged in the great debate and convention that led to the establishment of the longest-standing constitutional document throughout the entire course of human events. Now, if you stop and think about it and look at the way that the historical revisionists have been teaching American history for generation after successive generation now, they would have you believe that it's not that important. They don't even imbue us with the knowledge that our Constitution is the longest standing document of its type and character in all world history. Why? Because that would move to undermine their propagandist narrative and agenda. The initiative that they have set forth to undermine the societal fabric of these United States of America and to push this nation over the edge and cliff into the abyss of tyranny, despotism, but above all, oppression. Now, of course, many of the pawns in the socialist system have no idea that that's exactly what they're going to do. They have allowed themselves to have delusions of grandeur into concluding erroneously that the reason socialism has failed each and every time that it has been attempted on the face of God's green earth is simply because the wrong people were in charge. They just didn't know how to do it correctly. But folks, the clinical definition of insanity is to repeatedly do the same thing, expecting a different outcome or a different result. That is never going to work to improve the lot of the American people. And again, this is why Alexis de Tocqueville had basically stated that socialism and its proponents were trying to establish a new age form of feudalism, a static caste system in which the ruling elites lorded over or not just the American people, but any people where socialism is established. It's not a free system. It's not a system that recognizes individual human decency and dignity, and therefore it is something that is evil on its very face, in and of itself. So, we see that our shared United States Constitution is a contract between the sovereign people and their government. The government was beholden to the power of the people, and should it stray from the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of the Constitution, then it would be in breach of contract with the people. There was a time in this nation's relatively brief yet illustrious history that the people would not have tolerated these continued efforts to strip and deprive them of their fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. They would have let their fury be known. Now, however, thanks to the incessant efforts of the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists, the people have grown complacent. Not all of them, mind you, but an increasing and alarming number of them have. This means that the government believes that it possesses carte blanche to continue to strip and deprive us of our rights, and as Jeremy and I have stated so many times in the past, without our rights we are truly left with nothing. And that is shocking. That is something that we can ill afford to allow to continue unabated. But the other undeniable thing we are seeing is that there are fewer and fewer private medical practices in the country. And it all started with Johnson's Great Society. That is when the door really was kicked in for the government to intrude upon the practice and efficient administration of our medical field. And it has only it's only been getting worse with every attempt by the government to intrude upon the facets of our daily lives. And there is no more individualized, no more intimate facet of our daily lives than our own health care, our own health and well-being. You see, the government wants to tell you what's best for you, wants to tell you that you don't have the choice of either having health insurance or not. They want everybody to be forced to be covered, mandated. That is so antithetical to the spirit and letter of the supreme law of the land, which pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, which in the common American vernacular is the Supremacy Clause, states in no uncertain terms that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. And any laws that are directly contradictory to the clear and concise language contained therein is null and void. But we have so far departed from that. We have so far distanced and divorced ourselves from that we don't even realize what is significant and important anymore. But this death knell to private practice is getting worse. Oh, I can already hear the voices of some of the naysayers claiming that I don't know what I'm talking about here. But it is something I can talk about. We know that the draconian and overzealous governmental regulation has made it all but impossible for physicians to carry out the private practice of medicine. Thus, the Leviathan administrative state, which was originally developed or claimed to have been developed for the purpose of destroying monopolies, has created more monopolies. However, the exact and polar opposite is what we find unfurling before our eyes. These conglomerations are being created. Physicians are forced to either be employees of one of the major hospitals of their respective regions, while community clinics and local community hospitals are either forced to shutter or become part of a larger conglomeration. The biggest law or regulation that saw this come to fruition is HIPAA. This is supposedly designed to protect the privacy of patients. However, it simply makes the process of delivering high-quality care and treatment in an efficient fashion impossible. There's red tape that must be followed. There are enormous expenses shouldered by physicians to stay compliant with the ever-changing law or face cruel and unusual fines and penalties from the federal government. All of this is in direct violation of the Constitution. First of all, the physicians are typically not afforded notice and a hearing, although it's claimed they are. They're not allowed to jury trial in many cases because it's an administrative law issue, and are saddled with these expenses. This violates the due process clauses of the 5th and 14th Amendments, the ability to face your accusers, as is required by the 6th Amendment, your ability to a trial by jury, your 5th Amendment again, and it's also violative of the 8th Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. You see, the government is acting in a haughty and arrogant fashion. It is acting in a way that is diametrically opposed to the hopes, dreams, and aspirations of the American people. And it's punishing American citizens, both patient and care provider alike. And it's all designed to give the government more control over the facets of our daily lives where they have no business having any control whatsoever. But we have allowed this to continue. We have allowed this to come to fruition because we have lulled ourselves into a false sense of security, thinking that the government is some benevolent actor that will never operate against the best interests of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, we the people. But again, nothing could be further from the truth. All of this, by its very nature, is diametrically opposed to what our Constitution and what our federal government was designed to be. All of it works against our best interests, both as a nation and people. And unfortunately, folks, it shows no signs of improving within the foreseeable future. But it can be overturned by our own diligent efforts, by taking the steps that are necessary to secure our rights. But again, I go back to this notion of how people would say, I have no idea what I'm talking about. I do. Because my own family have gone through this, and I will expand upon that in the next segment. But, you know, all of this shows that whenever the government distances and divorces itself from the clear and concise language within the four corners of the Constitution, this is always the inevitable result. There's simply no way around this staunch fact of reality, folks. We have seen it play out in our nation's relatively brief yet illustrious history time and again. You know, Medicare and Medicaid with Johnson's Great Society was supposed to end all of this, but it didn't. It's never enough. It's never enough. And with each step that the government becomes increasingly and intrusively involved with the implementation of medical practice, the more and more expensive it becomes, because the more and more levels of distance is placed between the patient and their primary care physicians, and the more bureaucratic red tape that the medical practitioners have to follow and adhere to, the more difficult it is for the patient to receive efficient health care. All the while, the government continues raking in money. All the while, the government continues to implement these overzealous and draconian regulations that are strangling the lifeblood out of the system, that are making it inefficient, that are quadrupling the wait times. And it is not going to get better if we go to a single-payer system. In fact, that would be the very worst thing that we could do, because it would place us on a path to even greater government manipulation, corruption, and control. None of that ever plays out in the best interests of the American people. It doesn't promote our values. It doesn't place this nation in a better, stronger position. It works against us. It distracts us too. It allows them to move on to the next little plan in their little portfolio of tyranny. And this portfolio of tyranny is designed to weaken the people, to knock us to our knees, to make us wholly dependent for the entirety of our lives on the beneficence of the federal government. That is not what we are as a nation and people. That is not how we were designed to be. That is so offensive to the foundational spirit of this nation that it should be condemned by every decent, red-blooded, hard-working American citizen from coast to coast and border to border in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. But we see that so many people have been led astray. So many people have been brainwashed and indoctrinated by the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists into believing that this somehow is in their best interests, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. But yes, as I've said already, there are those who would say that, oh, what the hell does this lawyer from little Waco, McLennan County, Texas know about health care? Okay, so his parents were bumpkin doctors. No, they weren't. My mom was trained at Medical College of Pennsylvania. My father was trained at Baylor College of Medicine. They were leaders in their field. They were the first to do a hand replantation surgery in the state of Texas. They were leaders and are leaders in their respective fields. And here's the thing. I can personally attest to how the government's efforts have detrimentally impacted private practice. As all of you are well aware, my mother passed away on April 7th. But even before her unexpected passing, we were in the process of winding the practice down because HIPAA was becoming too difficult to comply with, because the expenses of continuing regulation and continuing certification was just making it to where they were having to pay money to keep the practice open. It had become too expensive to run the facilities and to care for patients. Patient care has become so heavily regulated that the private physician simply cannot make it anymore. And I cannot tell you how sickening that is. I am a sixth-generation Texan. My sister is both a sixth-generation Texan and a fifth-generation physician. We have seen, through our own family history, the direct and diabolical impact that this leviathan of an administrative state has had on the affairs of this nation. We have seen the great detriment that it has caused. We have seen the steady decline of government, or not government, but of healthcare, due to government's intrusions and involvement within the healthcare field. Folks, we cannot allow ourselves to be led down this destructive path. We are going to have to become proactive in the maintenance and safeguarding of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, because nobody else is going to do it. Here's the thing. We look to my father. He's moving on to work for a large company that provides medical treatment to patients. In other words, he is no longer his own employer. Again, this violates the American dream of being able to make it on our own terms. That is the result we suffer any and every time that we are saddled with overzealous government red tape and regulation. Sadly, that is the reality of modern medicine, and I fear that it will be exceedingly difficult for us to get back to a private free market solution. Because as you recall, good old President Mikey Pinsey said that the free market corrects itself and the American people lose every time. No. The American people do not lose every time with the free market. The American people and all people lose each and every time that the government attempts to dictate the facets of their daily lives. That is so intrinsically opposed to everything that we hold near and dear in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours that we shouldn't even consider it within this nation. It is a disgusting thing to see. It is something that is grotesque in its form and nature, but that is what they do. That is how they act. Why? Because deep down, they know that they will separate themselves from it. Think back to the way of during the rise of the so-called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act that our members of Congress had exempted themselves from it. Now, folks, that is not what this nation is about. The United States of America, by its very design, is supposed to be a nation of laws and not of men, meaning equal protection and due process under the law, meaning that we do not have a nobility here, meaning that we do not recognize these arbitrary and capricious sorts of separation that the government attempts to foist upon the American people and completely against their will. That is something that must not, shall not, and as long as there is breath in my lungs, will not be tolerated. Because it is disingenuous, it is designed to be harmful, it is destructive per se to those time-honored and well-established values, traditions, and institutions of these United States of America. How is it that we have allowed ourselves to go to a point where physicians can no longer make a living? We have done it because of that Cloward and Piven strategy, that attempt to overwhelm the private practice of medicine through government intermeddling to thereby force the people on bended knee to crawl to the government and beg for a single-payer system. And you know what, folks? That is exactly what the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or as it's known in the common American vernacular, Obamacare, was designed to do. Obama himself even said that his initial goal was to create a single-payer or single-party payer system. The single party paying would be the government, as opposed to multiple parties. When we allow the government to act in such a form and facet, you see that it strips and deprives us of our rights each and every time. It is something we can ill afford to do, because it strips and deprives us of everything. And again, as Jeremy and I have so oft times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, without our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, we are truly left with nothing. And that is certainly something that I don't want, and I'm fairly certain that is something that the vast majority of you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, don't want to have befall this nation either. Because it weakens us. It strips and deprives us of all that we hold near and dear. And that is never something that is good. It is always dark, twisted, maniacal, and nefarious. And it will leave us in a state of disrepair and decay. You see, none of this is about providing quality health care. None of this is about improving the standard of care. In fact, the exact and polar opposite is what is going to be the conclusion of all of this. That is the ultimate outcome that we are going to suffer both as a nation and people, because the standard of care will decrease as the government becomes more involved, because the government will be assuming more and more of the cost, which means it has to come from the taxpayers. Folks, we're broke as a nation. Our debt, our unsustained debt, is astronomical and climbing with each passing second. Just go look at the debt clock. You'll see how astronomical and out of control it is. And neither one of the two mainstay political parties are, alleviating the problem. None of them are implementing plans and policies that would fix it. They're all addicted to spending money which is not rightly theirs, and money that we do not have either as a nation or people. So why is it that they continue to do this? Well, they have convinced themselves that it's all right because, again, they have exempted themselves from all of the detrimental and deleterious impacts of what it is they're doing. And therefore they think that they can get away with it. Well, no. That's just not how it works. You see, Both sides are marching to ever increased governmental control, influence, and regulation over what was once the best healthcare system in the entire world. Government bureaucrats are telling doctors how to practice medicine while having no medical training themselves. It's a system of corruption. There's really no more apt a description of what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have thrust upon this nation than that of sheer, unadulterated, and unreasonable regulation and corruption. But we can overcome it, folks. We can overcome it by restoring the clear and concise language of our shared United States Constitution at all levels of government, forcing them to strictly adhere to it. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Folks, she's not there to tell you what type of alcohol you can have. She's just there to serve you alcohol. As always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Should you have any questions, comments, concerns, or even topic suggestions, I invite you to leave them either here in the comment section on our YouTube page or our Google Plus page or even our Facebook page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. There you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account as well as the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapington. You will also find the Blogspot account, which is chock full of useful information. And just as you'll find in the description section of today's broadcast, you will find the Cafe Press account. Folks, at the Cafe Press account, we have all sorts of novelty items, trinkets, and goodies at reasonable prices with a wide array of products with either our original Radio Aviation Excellence logo on them or our First Class Passenger logo or even the two Uplifting America logos, one of which we use at the start of every program. And with such a wide array of stuff, with birthdays and the 4th of July going to be a few months away, you just can't go wrong with the Cafe Press account. And if you have not already done so, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All subscribers are welcomed here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. We really do appreciate your input and your interaction, and we produce these shows for you folks. We couldn't do it without you, and we really do appreciate all that you do watching us. With that said, we hope to see you again next time. Please do take care.